Good morning, Vikings fans.
Adrian Cronauer, nice work.
Ooh. There's another guy my dad always tells me I should copy. I forget who it is, but he does a real slow good morning or hello, something like that. But I like the homage to Mr. Robin Williams. Yeah. This is Morning Joe's. I've had my Red Bull. There's been enough time between the Rams game for me to recharge my batteries and not feel as apocalyptic about
You
the
lost
state
the
of the
you
team.
lost the U in morning.
Yeah. Or maybe I'll put a question mark in brackets next to the U in brackets. It's a cautiously optimistic show. Yeah. So I'm Joe Johnson. I own Purple PTSD and Vikings Territory. I write there, and I also host the Purple Journal podcast, which is live Wednesday nights. And then you can podcast that basically from Wednesday night through infinity. I am here with Joe Oberly, who writes for Purple PTSD and Vikings Territory. He's actually the editor of those sites, so he's fancy. Don't make eye contact with him in public, is what I'm telling you.
And the NFL, I cover the NFL from Sports Post.
There you go. So Joe gets to go to, if I haven't made this clear, Joe has a press pass, so he's extra fancy, and he gets a lot of great insight that way. And before we get into the 5 Friday Furious facts, I'm going to mess that up a different way every week, I believe. I wanted...
We don't say one F word in there that we don't want in there.
Really quickly, some of you I know listen to a lot of our media, and so I don't want to really beat a dead horse any more than I have, but I wanted to...
No, not Zimmer.
I know. I felt like if you listen to the show on Tuesday, which a lot of you did, the numbers are good, which is scary because I was all by myself, and you saw what a fraud I am. I felt as opposed to, well, I'll explain it, and then I'll just let you state your piece, and I think we can just leave it at that, because I felt like I had like an hour by myself, where I went into every frickin' possible caveat of that argument. And so I wanted to put a counterbalance to it so people can kind of understand that. I'll just explain the article really quickly. I watched a lot of our media and external media and saw people saying things like Zimmers been exposed, on a wide range of emotions people had towards that. And then I saw something that Charlie Walters wrote for the Pioneer Press saying that if things don't change, the Vikings could or should, I forget which, make a change to DeFilippo at the end of the season. And so I felt like, should the team lose, end up 500 or worse, mainly because the defense isn't playing well, I didn't think it was that much of a stretch to say that Zimmer might be replaced, but that his seat is officially getting warm because there's so many people out there saying this across the Twitter sphere. That would seem to be controversial just because I verbalized, I put it that extra step, but I wasn't necessarily saying I want that to happen. I just said I could foresee that happening, mainly because the team has invested so much money in winning right now, and if the defense fell apart and Zimmer can't fix it, why would you go back to him, I guess? And so that's what the argument was. It wasn't that he's going to get fired this week or next week. It's that I wouldn't be surprised if the team made a move if they're sub 500 and the defense sucks, because I don't see why they wouldn't. So that was the argument, or the article. And so go for it and tell me why I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Exasperated sigh.
Yes. You're not, like I said earlier, it's worth bringing up, but it's not worth hammering on because A, nothing's going to happen, and B, he doesn't deserve to. I mean, if his defense has been figured out by some other coaches, fine. Zimmer will adjust again. That's what he does. It's what he's always done. He knows what to do. And see, if Filippo is really that hot, how about a running game, dude?
Ooh.
It's it's not time to coordinate John DeFilippo just yet. This is his first year or second time as an offensive coordinator, and I mean he wasn't the OC in Philly. Yeah, it was Peterson calling his plays. I like him. I think he's great. He's got got the passing game going around here, which has struggled for years, but that has as much to do with Kirk Cousins as it does him, and so I'm surprised by that take that we wouldn't want to let him go. I mean, that it would be a knee-jerk reaction to, oh my God, John DeFilippo's here. We better sign him on long term before he gets away and get rid of Zimmer, who's built up this team into relevance again after the team he got from Leslie Frazier. So I'm not on board with this take. I understand the asking of the question, and it is, like your title says, is it a little warmer? Sure. I mean, Zimmer's got some responsibility for how his defense has played and how his team has performed. He's the head coach, but I don't think to the degree that the pitchfork should come out and we should start, looking at, it's almost like it's like the backup quarterback, the most coveted player on a team that's underperforming. You look past your quarterback and say, oh God, that guy sitting on the bench can do better. Well, get me a running game and get back to me, John. Then we'll take a look at it.
That's a perfect segue because he said multiple times in an interview with I forget who that nobody at TCO wants to run the ball more than he does.
Right.
He said that 2-3 times, and that they're grinding their butts off to make that happen. I think his explanation for the Rams game was that he preferred the mismatch with the two corners being out as opposed to running it up the gut to, Ndamukong Suh and Aaron Donald, which is a valid argument. However, we talked about this on the Purple Journal podcast. I do fear, and it has been working, so, I'm not super afraid about this, but when you're going into like a hostile environment like Philadelphia, coming from the Coliseum, which holds, a ton of people, it'd be nice if they did have a lead, if they could run the clock out, as opposed to having to throw it to pick up first downs and do that. Again, Cousins, outside of the fumbles, has been playing lights out the last 2 weeks. Outside of Andrew Luck's night, who I think he had over 120 the last 2 weeks, 120 pass attempts. Cousins has had over 100 for sure, maybe over 110. I don't know offhand. But I don't know where they're at with that. With Elflein coming back, we've talked in the last couple of weeks, maybe that would be a boost to the run game. I mean, where are your general thoughts on that? I mean, obviously Dalvin Cook has the hammy. He was on a pitch count anyway. Latavius Murray seems healthier than he was last season. He had a preseason that we were all looking at like, wow, this guy could really be a boon for us. He had some fumbles as well in the preseason that he seemed to fix. Do you foresee them maybe going into the game running the ball?
I don't. And let me say this at the outset: you can't put it all the running game on DeFilippo. I mean, the offensive line, we knew before the season they were better pass blockers than they were run blockers. At least the line that they were throwing out there. I agree with you. The return of Elflein should help, and maybe he's still getting into his feeling his oats. I mean, they always say about a line's got to work together for a long time. Well, when you throw a guy in there after 2 or 3 games, and he's got to get used to these other guys and blah blah blah. So I'm not going to hang it all on him. You asked that question. Do you think they're going to run? And I'll say I'm going to put out one of my Friday 5 furious facts.
What a segue!
But and one of them is the Vikings are last in rushing in the NFL, just 63 yards per game. And and they're going to be going against the number one rushing defense that gives in Philly that gives up 63.8 yards a game. Something's got to give there for 0.8 yards. That means that the Vikings should be. I think they should rest Cook and let Murray and Boone and Rock Thomas have at it because Cook has not practiced yet this week. With the hammy, he was. He's not been at full speed, unfortunately, and that's how many times have we seen that a guy misses a lot of time with an injury and comes back and then just gets injured again. So that's stuff that happens. It's unfortunate, but I would say I wouldn't even play Cook in this game, and this is as a fantasy football owner that has him on his team. But let him rest and let those other guys try to pound into this wall that they're not going to get anywhere, and at least offer the semblance of a running game so that you can keep the defense honest. But it's not going to happen this week. They'll try it. They'll try to establish it a couple times, and if it doesn't work, then they'll start throwing the ball. And I guess I would say in that regard, Joe, watching the Rams game, to quote whatever the Gladiator, "Were you not entertained?" I mean,
Russell Crowe. Is that not why you were here?
I was entertained, and I've always. And I know you are a passing guy. You like wide receivers, and so am I. I love passing offense. I know you need a rushing defense, but I don't think they're going to find it this week. And in the meantime, let Kirk Cousins fling the ball.
Yeah, that scares me a little bit. And speaking of Gladiator, I could see all the Vikings fans in the crowd doing the thumbs down after the game.
I can continue with my 5.
Yeah, just to touch on the rushing thing. Yeah, I feel like it's gonna get worse before it gets better. I'm surprised that the Vikings even have 60 yards on average, to be honest, considering they've had games with 6 attempts, and they clearly weren't picking up 10 yards per attempt. So
yeah, they had 14 yards in one game. Wasn't that against Buffalo or something like that?
And it was one of the lowest amounts of rushing attempts in NFL history. So there you go.
Quarterback. 2 of the 6 were by the quarterback scrambling. So
he's our best rusher. That's terrifying. But again, DeFilippo apparently wants to run the ball, or he just knew that he should say that, which I'm leaning a little bit towards that. So what's the next of the 5 Friday Furious facts?
Well, I mentioned Cousins, and he's the saving grace of this offense. He's the 3rd leading passer in the league coming into the weekend. He has 347 yards per game passing, and he's tied for 6th in touchdown passes with 10, which is 2.5 per game.
How many picks does he have? Do you know offhand?
I think he has 1 or 2. I mean, I could look it up. I can't remember off the top.
Yeah,
I know he had one off Treadwell's hands, and I don't know. His number on those are low. He's tougher with worse numbers with the fumbling, but I think he's only got 1, maybe 2 picks. Anyway, I think he's been the offense, and he's stood in there. He's been pressured probably more than most quarterbacks in the league. Yet he's stood in there and made some great passes, some great touch passes in the small windows, and he's going to have to continue to do that. They're going to have to be flinging the ball throughout the game in order to beat him. And someone's got to catch it, which is another my 3rd Friday Furious fact, and that is Adam Thielen is the second in the league in yardage with 118.3 per game. I think he's 2nd in catches too with 40. And Diggs is I read this morning, he's 13th with 27 catches or something like that. So they got 2 guys that can catch the ball, run patterns, and there might be some openings for them because I think they're a little banged up in the secondary for Philadelphia. So I think to segue back to your original question, that's why they're going to end up throwing the ball quite a bit. That's where their strength is on this offense, and why not use it? You expect to see a lot from those guys and get them in your fantasy football lineups.
God, Thielen is just a beast. He is so good, and he seems to get better every year. he's the type of guy that always says, like, what he's doing wrong or what he wants to improve upon, seemingly when especially during training camp. And I wonder what the record for the most receptions for a single season is for a Vikings wide receiver. Because I've seen some stuff out there that he's on pace to break some team records.
I think wasn't it Carter who had it that one year? He set the NFL record, I think, or came up one short and he had a big hissy fit about it. It's around 100, I think, is what it is. And if he's already got 40, that's pretty amazing.
Yikes!
Quarter of the way in. You make a great point about the Illinois trying to get better, and he's a big time golfer, and he played for Detroit Lakes high school team that won the state tournament way back in the day, and maybe that's a mentality because you can never win at golf, you never beat golf, you always have to try to improve, and I've seen him throw his helmet when he gets injured because he doesn't want to be out there, and I see him, you've seen him, throw up his hands if he's unjustly called for a penalty or called down like he was against the Rams when he wasn't touched. He was pretty heated about that. So he's got quite the fire in his belly to improve and to win and compete. And it's just funny because he's such a mild-mannered guy off the field that you don't expect it, but it's so great to see where he came from and where he is.
Yeah.
But that's where they're going to have to go. So where I'm going to have to go is to 5 Friday Furious Facts number 4. How about that? All those F words. The Vikings defense have done an about face this year, going from first in both yards and points last year to allowing, and so now they're 21st in yards at 381.5 given up per game, and they're 21st in points, giving up 27.5 points per game.
Wow.
Yeah. And I looked back at last year how they did against the Eagles in the NFC title game, and they gave up 346 yards and 38 points. Everybody knows 38 points because everybody's saying 38-7 and having fun with those numbers. But these points should put a scare into every Vikings fan this October, given an October scare, Halloween scare. But
so I did 2 big predictions before the season. One was that Cousins would be a top 5, and I was kind of on the fence, maybe top 3, depending on how you'd even break that down. MVP candidate, and that the defense would allow 14 points or less, because they allowed 15.8 last season, and I thought, another year together, you bring in Sheldon Richardson, who is an improvement on Sharif Floyd, who they missed last season, and they're basically doubling my prediction right now, which is just a freaking nightmare.
Oh, yeah, I saw a stat that from Nick Olson over at Vikings Territory wrote that last year they gave, what did you say, 15.5 or whatever per game?
Yeah, 15.8.
Yeah, well, this year they're giving up 18.7 or something in the first half.
Ugh.
It's incredible. I mean, what's happened there? It's so hard to explain, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I wonder where, and we can delve into this a little bit later, but where do you, if you were to put a percentage on scheme versus execution, so if they're getting it, just Zimmers getting out schemed, if it 95-5 to execution, or if the players are just struggling to kind of do their job, where would you put that with Zimmer being first? So if it's mostly scheme, 75-25 or 50-50.
To answer that question, I need to do my mobile shout out or my lifeline call. Where's Luke?
Phone a friend.
That's a great question, and I've always noticed people call it a great question when you don't have the answer.
Yeah, that's to buy some time.
But I don't know. I've always, Now, when you say scheme, you're talking about the exposure of the scheme, because the Zimmer schemes have worked in the past. It's his scheme that made them the top defense last year.
Yeah,
and it's doubtful that they changed the scheme that much. So
I did. The fear floating out there, not to interrupt you, is that, and I heard that, and this is why I'm surprised that some of the people that said this told me, that take, I don't agree with that, Zimmer on the hot seat take. And so basically the feeling is that the scheme is the same, but that teams have it figured out. And then that Zimmer, almost in a Norv Turner type way, doesn't know how to adjust beyond that. And that's such a loaded thing. I know Luke said on Purple Journal podcast that Zimmer doesn't really have a scheme. He has a bunch of different, it's there's so many adjustments to be made. Right. But, to me, I'll just say I think it's 50-50, but they're both really bad. I think that Zimmer is getting out-schemed. I think that, maybe he's blitzing at the wrong time. He's said that a couple times, that maybe he blitzed at the wrong time or wasn't blitzing enough. And then clearly some of the players aren't really playing up to their potential. Anthony Barr gets a lot of crap. Even like Xavier Rhodes seems to be in a funk, so.
Right. This morning that they seemed they played like trash. So, I guess going on off of that, what Rhodes said, there is execution. You got Zimmer saying that he's overcoaching them, perhaps, because that he's taken some responsibility. I don't know. I think you'll find out more this weekend. Of course, the last two teams that whooped up on him were well, I shouldn't say the last two, but the last coach that beat him is a pretty good offensive mind, and you'll find another one this week. If Zimmer doesn't have anything to respond to how Peterson is going to play him, then you got to take deeper looks at both the scheme and who's running it, and because as we said on the PJ broadcast on Wednesday, this is a lot of your players are signed up; they're locked in for a while, so.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's Zimmer's fault. I have full faith in him to respond. It kind of leads into my final of my 5 Friday Furious Facts.
Your final.
It could be 10 days. Zimmer's had 10 days.
Oh.
With that last game, to figure out his defensive problems. And
Andy has a guy named John DeFilippo whose first and only interview question should have been, how the hell did you do that to us in the NFC Championship game? Right.
And it's funny. I don't know if you've seen any of the Filippo's responses to those kind of questions, how he's going to help out. He said, both him and Zimmer and George Edwards all said, well, yeah, they talked a lot about it in the offseason. And now DeFilippo has to worry about scheming for this game and not necessarily doing that. So they haven't been talking about it lately. But the problem is, if they think that Peterson's sit tight and do the same dang thing he did last time, they're crazy. You've got to be ready for them to do some things and how they beat them. But what you have to do is recognize where you are vulnerable, expect that maybe that's where they're going to attack, and then do something to thwart that. I don't know how that's done. I'm not a football coach, but if it's more of the same, and if you get out schemed and out coached again, Zimmer, you may be time to hand over the reins to Edwards and see if he can do something better. I don't know.
I've heard a lot of that, and I wouldn't. That would be a huge admission.
Yes.
It would mean a lot. But you're right. I mean, they I asked Luke about how he felt about facing some of the, basically he was saying that when you face a team my point was, people were telling me, well, the Rams are the best team in football, so don't freak out, and my pathetic response was, but I don't want to be the best team in football. And so my question with Luke explaining a lot of, he was doing a very good job of it, sort of explaining away the failures of the Vikings defense, I said, well, what does that mean for the playoffs? Are we just going to get rolled? Like, should I lower my expectations from the Vikings being a Super Bowl team to maybe the Vikings being a second-tier team? And he said that, when you face a team twice in a season, it's an equalizer because you see, you know what they do. And so, yeah, having 10 days, having DeFilippo there, which was, to me, that and having Kirk Cousins come in as a guy who faced the Eagles and had a lot of success against them when he was playing for the Redskins. You're right. I mean, I wonder how much of a label you feel comfortable putting on this game in regards to it being a must-win. I did say that about the Rams game. It was kind of a clickbaity title, not intentionally. But I said, the team has to show up. The defense especially has to show up. I feel like the offense, it was a 50-50 proposition. I feel like the offense looked amazing. I mean, to keep up with the Rams like that was something that they deserve praise for. But, they almost gave up 600 yards. Jared Goff had, 4 touchdowns before halftime. And then you kind of got to say that the Rams defense didn't have their top 2 corners too. That might have had something to do with it.
They had one of them, but the other one was injured. He played, but Marcus Peters was on the field, but he was not in the same. He was injured, so he was not his full speed. But I guess I was to a point you made earlier. If you didn't lower your expectations about this team after 27-6 versus the Buffalo Bills, I don't know.
Yeah. I've told the story before, but I think it perfectly sums up what happened. I got home late. My dad wasn't even watching the game at this point. He goes, "You're going to be pissed." And I said, "What?" And he said, 17-0, 2 turnovers in the red zone, in our red zone. And I go, "That's impossible." It did not register with me that was even a possibility. I thought he was waiting for me to get home. He had the game on the DVR, and that he was just playing a joke on me. So yeah, especially
I would say if they play this team tough this week, and I expect them to win. I really do, because I don't think that was my prediction that I made. It's going to be a tough game, a tight game, but they should be emotionally ready, because of the embarrassment they experienced on this field, last January. They should be scheme ready, because they've had 10 days off. They should be, if they don't try, stubborn, foolheadishly to run the ball down a throat that's just closed, and go with their strength, they're going to play well in this game. And it's going to come down to the defense stopping Wentz and hitting. He's been hit quite a bit. He was hit, 14 times in his pressured, I should say. Maybe they're hits. I can't remember. I think they are hits in 2 games he's played. So there's opportunity there for them, but they have to be ready to play. They have to be assignment sound and be where they're supposed to be, and be ready to make an adjustment when Peterson does something they didn't expect. So they all got to be on their point, their P's and Q's. I don't think this team is so bad that that they can't play with these guys or anybody else. They played with the Rams last week, and they can play with this Eagles team. They just have to be ready to do so.
I would like more balance. I mean, they did keep up with the Rams, but that was a complete shootout, basically.
Right.
They punted twice?
Were you not entertained?
It sucks that we have said that. Well, at least it was an entertaining game. So the same thing about the Packers game. I wonder. I don't know. I feel like. Well, we'll get into my 3 ways I think that the team can win, but I do feel like everything you've said is solid, and it scares me because if things aren't any better, especially, I mean, this Eagles team is 2-2. They lost to the Titans in overtime with Wentz. They lost to the Bucks, who were playing lights out at the time. I don't really understand why they made the move at quarterback that they did, but at least they picked up Ryan Fitzpatrick after he got benched. I'm good at fantasy football. I looked at it and said, 2.5 million people have dropped Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I'm like, ooh, I'm smart. Nope. But yeah, my larger point being that this team is 2-2. They're figuring themselves out. I wonder how much of an impact, we talking about the familiarity with the team. We didn't face Wentz last year. A big part of me saying we needed to add Kirk Cousins was, we got bested by a backup quarterback. Just wait for their MVP to come back. We got to keep, almost like in a Rams type fashion, we got to keep pace and continue to improve. We need a high-flying offense that'll bounce off with this, stingy defense. We'll get into that in a minute because there's a couple news things that I wanted to cover. I've been going to the doctor a lot lately, and there's a guy that checks me in.
You've been going to that.
And it's gonna be twins. The guy that checks me in, the first thing he said to me this morning was, "Hey man, when you doing your next show?" And I said, "This morning." He goes, "What's up with George Iloka?" And I said, "Tune in," and because I didn't have an answer for him. I did see that.
Say good question. Sorry.
Yeah. I just said, "Hey, that's weird," because that was on the agenda. Edwards did mention that they've been kind of rotating him in and out, and that they, he just had to learn. It takes him time to learn the defense. I wonder how they might use him, and if they use him maybe as a hybrid linebacker, if that might allow Anthony Barr to do what a lot of people thought he might. He was apparently doing a lot of pass rushing, lining up at the defensive line during training camp and OTAs and stuff. And I wonder if they have a guy back at safety who maybe can step up and pick up the slack at linebacker, which would help because Barr lining up with wide receivers clearly is an Achilles heel when that happens, and it should not happen. But maybe if they can have Barr rush Wentz, who's a big guy, hard to bring down. He's super tough, as we mentioned as well. He came back in after he tore his ACL and ran, I think, a successful 2-point conversion after the rushing touchdown. So, kind of a multifaceted question, but it seems like we'll see more of him this week.
I think you're right. Reading the tea leaves, excuse me, he addressed the media in the locker room yesterday. I was out at TCO, and he's a tall dude. It's funny. I didn't realize that. But he was, saying the right things and not trying to trash the coaches for not getting him in there. He did mention that he's always been a starter in this league, and a little surprised that he hasn't played in there because he's in there, doing what he's supposed to do and waiting for his opportunity. You heard George Edwards hint at it that he might do it and might get in there this weekend. I'm thinking that means you're going to see him. I mean, why not? Maybe Zimmer was saving him for this game, more than anything else because it's a wrinkle he can throw at Peterson that he might not have expected. And to be perfectly honest, when you're one of the worst defenses in the league right now, and I should say that, they're 21st, but that's down there, and you used to be best, you've got to change it up. You've got to try to do something different. And maybe by being so cautious with him knowing my defense that he is overcoaching, you should just throw out a guy who has some skills and he knows he can count on and can trust him and he's still a viable player in this league. Throw him out there and see what he can do. And unless you've seen him running around practice totally confused, get him out there. Get more bodies in the game. They have let's have a rotation on the defensive line, and with those guys that are in the backfield are running up and down the field too. Get some different bodies in there and show the defense something that they didn't see coming. I'm all for it, and I agree with you, Joe. I think we are going to see Iloka this Sunday against Philly.
Yeah, there's a couple quotes too. I wanted to. We kind of touched on this. I looked at my notes a little bit better when we were talking about it. But DeFilippo said a couple things about beating the Eagles that I thought were interesting. One was you got to think outside the box. and the other was that you have to stay aggressive. So I do think that you're right, that should the Vikings have a lead, they might not let up. I think we're going to continue to see a lot of aggressive pass plays from Cousins, who, again, I think has played well against the Eagles. I think he feels comfortable on the East Coast. I don't think he'll be intimidated at all.
He's been in that I don't know what you want to call that place where the Eagles play, but it's pretty intense.
Seventh ring of hell.
What that's all about. That's a very good point.
And the other part of it is, how concerned are you with the fumbles? Is that just something you think we're gonna have to, the bad that comes with the good that offsets it, or do you think maybe he can somehow get more pocket presence at this stage of his career?
I think that's more reputation than actuality, just a little bit. I mean, it's always a matter of degrees and all this stuff. And Kirk Cousins addressed that on Wednesday at the practice at TCO. And I thought he gave a really good response. He said he was talking with George Stefanski, who said not all fumbles are created equally, and
that's a very good point.
Yes, and he said, you know what? It's every coach is going to tell you to ward off fumbles, get both hands on the ball, bases. But at the same point, when you're a quarterback and you're still trying to make plays down the field, you've got to keep your head up and you got to be ready to throw. And maybe he learns how to rush through the line better with both hands and then get ready to throw. But everything happens so fast, and sometimes I think we as non-players expect miracles out of these guys. But if I could say he needs to do anything better, it is to sense that presence to step up a little more when that help him out. He lacks a little bit there, but I have no qualms or no problem with how he's reacted to pressure in the way of knowing he's going to get drilled and still hanging in there and making these touch passes into tight windows. I mean, we've seen them on some of the plays that as soon as the ball leaves his hands, he gets hit, and he's still making these just incredible passes. Maybe some of them are risky, but he's getting away with it.
So far, yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. I think. We have to keep watching him, and you take each fumble on its own merit and say, well, what was the reason for this? Is it because his blind side was not protected and someone came around behind and slapped it out? Is it because Kirk didn't step up in the pocket when he should have? Dress them for what they are, and not just look at he's got the most fumbles of such of any quarterback in the league over this period of time. I mean, you can make those numbers do anything, but that has nothing to do with the fumble that happens in the game. You got to look at what it is, what the reason.
Then you have to think about he had over 110 passing attempts in 2 games. I think most quarterbacks, he could have stepped up maybe on the final Rams one, but most quarterbacks are going to fumble that ball. In real time, it looked like a forward pass to me. It was that quick. But, even I think, Brady or Rodgers getting hit on their funny bone, basically, as they're split second away from throwing, most guys are going to make, unless he steps up in the pocket. But that's a good segue, really, for I wanted to do some first quarter of the season grades. We've alluded to a lot of this stuff, so we don't have to go super in-depth. We have about 15, 20 minutes left. Actually, this is the internet, so we can do whatever we want. But starting with
I gotta go get a beer then.
Morning Joe's is gonna lead you to the drink. The offense as a whole, where would you put them on an A to F scale?
A to S?
F.
Oh, A to F. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, A to S. What's that scale? Awesome to they really suck. Let's see. The offense, I'm going to give a B minus to. And it's
B minus.
B as in boy, minus,
Okay.
because of the running game.
Yeah.
They've scored a lot of points. They got the third leading passer in the league in yards and tied for sixth in points. They're producing points, which is ultimately what you want out of them. But you can't give them an A because A, they're 1-2-1, and B, their running game is absent. So
practically non-existent.
Exactly. So I would say a B minus, and if they get the running game going and they start winning some ball games, that shoots up to an A in my book. I've been enjoying Kirk Cousins running this offense.
I think that's fair. Looking at it, if you're splitting the difference between having a passing game that's like an A, and then completely non-existent, and F for the run game, you're going to end up at a C. So a B minus is really a testament to how good this passing offense is doing. And with all the negativity, I always focus on the negative. That's just how my brain works. But yeah, I mean, what I love about doing these shows is I kind of see things from a different perspective. And you got to think that, God, if they can just get the defense to some semblance of what they were last season, we should be really encouraged, or we would be at the time.
Right.
But I'm super interested to hear what your grade is for the defense.
Got to go D minus, just because D as in dog, because they've been a dog. They have all we heard coming in with this new quarterback. Kirk has to do is score enough points to
21 points or more. Everyone was saying.
Exactly. It's all he needs to do, and he's done that in spades. And the defense has clearly not held up their end. They ever since Harrison Smith picked off that pass at the end of the San Francisco game, it's just been downhill ever since. They can't stop anybody. Now, granted, they've had some tough games. They've gone against Aaron Rodgers, although a gimpy Aaron Rodgers, and they've gone against that juggernaut Josh Allen from Buffalo. Oh, wait, not. And they went against Jared Goff and the Rams, who are you have to put them on the best team this year, and you have the way he's playing. He's been on a trajectory since he came in the league, and has been getting better every year. So that's why it's not a total F for me, but it's darn close. It's been so disappointing to see them just struggle out there, and to see them get burned on these huge, big plays, which they wasn't happening last year. And last year they were putting teams in long third down situations, just dominating, and none of that is present. So to me, if they turn it around, and I think they can, that like you were just saying, that's going to be how this season goes, because I think the offense will continue to keep playing and hopefully get better when Dalvin Cook is healthy and the line is to where they should be.
I put the defense the same exact grade. The only thing keeping them from an F to me, and this is kind of cheating a little bit, is the personnel is so good. Sheldon Richardson has been playing lights out, and it's just something's gotta give. I think this game is gonna be so telling. Another interesting, the last one, and then I have a big question about the defense, and then we can get into the three ways to win or lose against the Eagles, is in regards to special teams, C minus. They made a big change at the kicking position. That to me was great. I was very worried about bringing in a rookie kicker just based on the history. I think I heard you knocking on wood. So far Dan Bailey's been as advertised.
Yeah, that's the one thing that gets them off of the F or D grade is them making that change, because 0 for 3 against the Packers, causing them to lose a winnable game in Lambeau was hugely. That's a big mistake. It's to have brought that kid in and put him in there, but they cut bait and they made the change, and it was the right thing to do. So they haven't been great on coverage or return.
Yeah, I was going to ask about your return stuff.
Yeah, they just haven't been great there. So they've got a ways to improve, but they were struggling, and they just haven't they haven't really hurt us other than that kicking game, but they're. I think they're on the rise. I'm hoping they are, and their long snapper now is missing a finger, so they're
yeah. The last thing I wanted to touch on the defense, and you kind of touched on this a little bit. It was something that Luke said on Purple Journal, that he felt that, in sort of a continuation of what he said about the Eagles game last year, is that, and this makes sense to me. That perhaps Zimmer learned the wrong lessons from that game. At the time, I remember Luke saying, when the question was, well, how could a guy like Harrison Smith, an All-Pro guy, be that far out of position on multiple plays and look confused? The color commentator during the NFC Championship said he looks confused, like he doesn't know what's going on. He looks confused.
Right.
And that was explained as Zimmer basically rolled out an entirely new scheme against the Eagles last year. And so the working theory then would be, as opposed to going back to basics, he felt maybe that he was exposed a little bit by the Eagles, and he's been working instead of 100-hour weeks, 200-hour weeks, trying to have this perfect system that nobody can beat. And Luke basically said that on certain plays, guys are looking at it and saying, okay, if this guy does this, then I have to do this. But if that happens, then there's just too many variables.
Right.
And I wanted your take on that a little bit more. If you felt maybe that was the case, that they're being overcoached, and if they go back to basics, things will be at least better.
It's a good question. It's
because I know you mentioned he said somebody when you were out there said something about overcoaching.
Yes, that's what Zimmer said. He said that's when he was putting the blame on in one of his press conferences since Rams game, or maybe even the Bills game, was that it's on him too, and he was maybe overcoaching these guys. So it's a very possible. I don't know. I thought it was a good point Luke made, but I can't say whether or not that's the case because I don't know what, the difference between what he did last year and what he's doing this year. But when you see them, people like Anthony Barr against the Rams chasing three different,
positions.
Zone, yeah. You just don't heck's going on here because we never saw anything like that. You saw these players always in position, always swarming to the ball, always seeming to know what was going on, especially the linebackers, him and Kenrich. And they both look a little bit either out of position, out-schemed, overmatched, or mismatched, and for lack of a better term, lost, when they're trying to make their plays. And that's these players didn't just suddenly become lame.
Yeah.
Over the summer. They should have gotten better. And so maybe there is some truth to that where he tried to make his own adjustment and outsmart the rest of the league that maybe caught up to him, and it's been too much for his players. And if you think about that, then maybe that tells me that Zimmer's smart enough to make adjustments and know what to do, but maybe not the right ones so far yet this season. So I have faith in him. That's what I want to ask you. I have one more grade for the first quarter. What would you give the coaching?
Oh God,
I think I know that given your story. That's your fault.
As a whole, maybe a C. I think DeFilippo deserves almost a B plus, which is hard to say considering they haven't been running the ball. I think from a passing perspective, they've been amazing, and so I'll give that an A plus. So maybe a B minus actually for the offense because you gotta have some semblance of a run game. This isn't arena football. But I've been encouraged by that. I think the offensive line has been good in pass protection. I do agree with Luke's article from this week that they should move Remmers back to tackle. I would love to see that happen. But I'm not holding my breath. Zimmer, I think people know how I feel about that. I don't want to. I'll give it a D minus because I don't want to give it an F, but it's pretty bad. sadly, and
Okay.
I'm not the biggest on what's his face either. Prefer.
Yeah,
Speaking of being on the hot seat, what would you do?
I'm thinking when I made my grade, I was thinking about Zimmer and the coaching staff overall, and I'm giving them a C. They're underachieving a little bit, and maybe the part of that is somewhat of a new staff with a new offensive coordinator adjusting, but like you said, that side of it is up, and the defense side of it is down, and the special teams have just not they've not been an asset, and they've been a little bit of a. So I'm going to say, I'm going to give him a C, but I've got my eyes on him. I just pointed at my two eyes, and I'm pointing at the screen.
Yeah. Speaking of which, every Friday is kind of a look forward show. Tuesday's a look back to the previous game. So part of that is doing 3 ways that the Vikings can beat the Eagles. First is offensively to really be aggressive, as mentioned earlier. I think that I wanted to say run the ball, but with just the fact that the Vikings the mismatch is so piss poor with like the top rushing defense against the worst rushing offense. Right. Dalvin Cook not being there, I don't see that happening. So I think they have to be really aggressive on offense. I've been encouraged by their ability to go down the field so far this season. That was something that they didn't do a ton of last season, and I think that's what it's going to take for them to win. They have to. Without a running game, you basically have to play next to perfect on offense or in the passing game, and Cousins has been able to do that. I think again he's got experience playing these guys twice a season, playing out in that stadium once a season. I think that he, people during the live chats or just online, I've seen people saying that Cousins looks skittish. Or that he seems neurotic, like somehow Woody Allen has been playing quarterback for the Vikings. Did you get that sense about him in person? Or
that's a good question. Once again, I think I'm going to have to think that that's just his style. I never watched enough of Cousins in Washington to really get a sense of what he's like as a quarterback. My sense is, in watching him as a Viking, he looks like he's playing, and I don't know if to say neurotic, but mindful of a underachieving offensive line, and he's going through his progressions quickly and almost jerkily, and then making the throws when he's need to make. So he's been successful. But I can see that, maybe what we're doing is comparing him to Case Keenum, who had a completely different style. He's a bit of a gunslinger who goes back there and doesn't care at all if he's going to get drilled. And if he senses the pocket coming in on him, he moves and he gets out of there and can run. And that's what he did. And Keenum will make the very risky pass and get away with it. He got away with it a lot last year, and sometimes he doesn't. He's throwing a few more interceptions this year than he had last year, I believe. So, it's a style. It's almost a herky-jerky style for Cousins that you wouldn't expect. I mean, we're hoping that he's going to be Aaron Rodgers, who's smooth as silk back there, just looking around, and that's not his style. Would Cousins be better maybe and less of that if he had a really solid offensive line? I think so, because he didn't have a good line in Washington. So maybe this is just the style he's developed, is saying, I got to get through these progressions quick, make my decision, boom, and get out of there before I get my head knocked off. I don't know.
I got the sense of him in Washington. I watched him a decent amount because
Big Ten.
You knew exactly where I was going. Me and my dad were kind of mad. 4th round, come on. Off the field, in the interviews or in the locker room, he seems like a really polished, professional type, super prepared. Maybe he gives some, football answers, which, you can't knock him for that. But yeah, there's a definite switch that gets flipped with him. The famous "you like that"? You wouldn't expect that from the guy that you see in those interviews. He has seemed a little more, he seemed in Washington more pumped up and not so much like nervous. And there's a fine line between those two things. But I think you're right. Maybe the lack of a running game and the high probability that he'll get lit up might contribute to that. That's actually the second way that I think the Vikings can beat the Eagles. Winning the turnover battle is super important in general. I mean, that's not a spicy take, but I think the Vikings can't win if they have more than one turnover. I think they can survive one. But I would love to see them, I think that was something we talked about in the offseason as something the team wanted to focus more on was turnovers. I know earlier in the season there was a couple of plays where Harrison Smith got beat for a touchdown, and we discussed it as kind of he's taking more chances to try to maybe get more turnovers, and that clearly worked as the final play of the 49ers game, but that's kind of cancels itself out when you give up a touchdown. They haven't been too great at that. It would have been, a completely different game if they could have maybe gotten a pick or two against the Rams. I think they got a little lucky with that missed field goal, making the game a little more close than maybe it would otherwise would have been. But yeah, if Cousins is fumbling and stuff, it's gonna be really hard for them to overcome that. I know again the Eagles they're 2-2, but they're just they almost feel like the Vikings did last year. That's actually a really quick tangent. I get a lot of people in response to the seat is warming up article saying, yeah, they were 2-2 last year, like relax. I feel like had a different feeling to it. I think that the one game was after they lost Bradford, the next one was the game that they lost Cook in, or the week after, I can't remember. But you didn't get the sense that the defense was falling apart, or you know what I mean?
Yep.
It just didn't feel the same way. It felt more like, oh, that sucks because look how good the rest of the team is doing. It sucks that Bradford's out, but he'll be back in a couple weeks, like we thought at the time, and so on and so forth. So I feel like the Eagles are in the same position right now. I feel like they're just waiting for Wentz to come back, for him to get back to full strength, for everyone to get their timing down, and they'll be fine. Whether or not they're completely there right now, probably not. That could be of some assistance to the Vikings, similarly to having Aaron Rodgers play banged up. But they're getting close to having a fully powered offense, which is completely terrifying. And the last one,
it's only going to get better. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, he's good.
Now that's just funny.
I want 10 cents every time someone says something like that. And the last one was basically just have the defense show up. And we've discussed that. But it's, I feel like really, as opposed to even just recapping that, I think we should end the show with this too. We do a prediction every week on Purple Journal Podcast, and we basically keep track of the points throughout the season and who has been closer with their score prediction. I got completely destroyed by you last season. I think it took 3 months for NASA to figure out the final score between us, and also the fact that I've used that joke about 4 times. But all of this having been said, I just wanted your take on, since I'm picking the Vikings to lose and you're picking them to win, and people should definitely read your game preview article too to see this, but how you think that's going to happen, or what the recipe for that success would be.
Oh, I mean, you've stated that pretty well. Defense has to play. They have to not be surprised by what they're seeing from Peterson. They're ready to adjust and stay with them the whole game. They have to not stubbornly pound their head into the brick wall with the running game. They need to show us enough that Philadelphia defense will be honest. But I think there's opportunities for them downfield. And they should go with their strength. I think the Phillies get a little bit nicked up. They got a defensive end that hasn't practiced. They have two running backs, Clement and Darren Sproles, who have not practiced. So, it may be J.J. and Smallwood that are going to be getting most of that. So they're hurting a little bit there because they like to throw a number of different running backs at you. Fortunately, Alshon Jeffrey is back in the game. So hopefully Trey Waynes gets back from his concussion and can play. Did you ever think that we were concerned whether or not Waynes was in there or not? Because I don't trust McKenzie yet to go on the outside and stick with Aguilar or whoever we'd have to.
Yeah, Nelson Aguilar.
So
he's on my fantasy team.
And they've got to get to Wentz. They've got to make him uncomfortable. They've got to hit him a couple times, and it sounds like there should be an opportunity to that. But the same old things. I guess the only thing I would say, you say on the agenda is it a must-win. I'm going to say they will win. I said last week the Vikings needed to get one of these two, and I thought this would be the one. So I'm sticking with that, and I'm going to say they are going to win it, and it's going to be a battle. Could come down to a Dan Bailey kick who's kicked in that field before or many times before. So that could happen.
That's helpful too. Yeah. What was your score prediction? It was speaking of a battle, wasn't it like 24-23 or something like something?
That's exactly what it was. So last minute field goal. They're down 23-21. They move into position, and Dan Bailey puts through the upright. And Zimmer has a heart attack because he's expecting it to miss.
Last season, I think you picked the Vikings to win every week, and I picked them to win every week except for one, which was the Packers game after Bradford went down. And clearly you were mostly right, but us having a week where I picked the Vikings to lose by a significant amount, and you picked them to win by a little bit, this could be a huge, in regards to ramifications for the prediction battle, which sadly I have more interest in than the actual game at this point. I just don't see it happening. I don't know. I do feel like it's a mix of scheme and the players. I always go back to last season. They, were asking like why is the defense playing so well? I think it was Harrison Smith said, because everyone is doing their job, and so I don't have to worry about covering for someone else because I know that they're going to be there. I feel like that is great when it works, but that almost sounds like a Jenga or dominoes waiting to happen. Because if one guy, Anthony Barr, is playing bad, then you have someone maybe like Kendricks feels like he has to compensate, or Harrison Smith, and so on and so forth. And when you have a couple guys either banged up like Trey Waynes has been, or just not, how we've had Xavier Rhodes' name called more in the first quarter of the season than it was all of last season. In regards to, I would almost bet that that's completely true. But he's had more catches on him this year than he did all of last season. He was a ghost because people couldn't throw to his side. That worries me. It makes me think about. I think I said on my the show that I did solo that I was worried about maybe some semblance of Rhett Ellison's dad's theory about how maybe Zimmer talks about players. Maybe they didn't like how he talked about Daniel Carlson, that's just an example. That if the team had a mutiny over a kicker, that would be the most Vikings thing ever, but that would never happen.
Speaking of your solo show, I'm glad to hear you talking today, or I was thought you were still talking to yourself over in that show.
Pretty much. Story of my life. I'll get you for that, Oberly. But yeah, I don't see them winning. I think it'll be 34-20, and I actually think it could end up being worse than that. But I want them to win, so I want people to know that from all the angry emails I got. I love the team. I do watch the games. A lot of people said I don't watch the games, and sadly, this is my day job. So, strike 3. But yeah, you should. We're gonna do we always do a pregame show. That's hosted by Tyler Hagg. It's gonna have a wide range of guys from both Purple PTSD and Vikings territory. That usually starts about an hour and 15 minutes before the game itself for a kickoff. So just follow our social media or our websites. You'll see that. We've been having a lot of fun. Joe's been there for our game chats too. And I don't want people to be intimidated by the fact that I'm there. Or that it's a lot of writers, so maybe your take isn't good enough or whatever. I mean,
all takes are welcome.
You totally. I mean clearly.
There and he thinks he'll be fired for crying out loud.
That's 2. But they're super fun, and misery loves company, so check that out. Otherwise, we will be back on Tuesday for Morning Joe's. We always, like I said, record Wednesday nights for Purple Journal Podcast. But despite the losses, we've been actually growing every week, which is astounding, because when the Vikings started 5-0 and then fell apart, we lost about 85% of our audience. So thanks to everyone that's been listening, and hopefully, I can't believe I'm saying this, but hopefully Oberly will be right, and I'll buy gnomes for everyone. But this has been Morning Joe's. Thanks for listening.